It's Ron Reader digs the universe. I'm Ron Reader, and this is Ron Reader Digs the Universe, and tonight, Phil Donahue. I've always loved Phil Donahue, who passed away over the weekend at the age of 88. I remember first watching his show with my mother in the summer of 1975, around the same time that she got me into the Twilight Zone. I was 7 years old, soon to start second grade. I spoke last week in the context of discussing Olympic women's boxing champion Imani Khalif about the Twilight Zone's moral insight. I think it's safe to say that I got a great deal of moral insight from following Phil Donahue too over the years as I've grown up and moved firmly into my middle age. 1975, a very important year in my moral development. Seriously, educational psychology tells us that's the age when children are struggling to understand the difference between right and wrong. Good time in your life to be a Twilight Zone and Phil Donahue fan. He'd been at it for nearly a decade by the time I discovered him. In 1967, he pioneered the daytime talk show format used by pretty much everybody now, from Tyra Banks to Drew Barrymore to Steve Wilkos. His show ran in syndication until 1996, and along the way, he picked up 20 Daytime Emmys and a Lifetime Achievement Emmy, but finally got out when competition from imitator freak shows featuring bad kids, drugs, fucked up relationships, paternity tests, and fistfights became too much. He tried to adapt, but just couldn't pull it off. Phil Donahue was a man of integrity and substance. Substance ultimately didn't do well for him a few years later when he returned to television hosting a differently formatted, left-leaning discussion show. Straight up, MSNBC fired him for being anti-war, which he had always been, while everybody else in the media was screaming for vengeance and blood against all Muslims in the wake of 9/11. We didn't really see any more substance on MSNBC until Keith Olbermann showed up a few years later. But man, when Donahue was allowed to speak his mind, he was all about substance. Throughout his career, he explored controversial issues, always finding and asserting the moral and compassionate position on those issues. He talked about AIDS and sex when nobody else was in the 1980s. He discussed race and racism. He covered the Catholic abuse scandal before anybody else. And interviews. He interviewed some awesome people: Bill Clinton, Richard Pryor, Gloria Steinem, and Nelson Mandela, among many others, always seeking the compassionate and moral position. Hell, he interviewed Louis Farrakhan and freaking Noam Chomsky. President Biden awarded him with the Medal of Freedom just last May. It was well deserved. Phil Donahue was a great man. He taught me to value group discussion. He taught me to be a feminist. Indeed, he taught me to value women as human beings, as equals to men. He taught me the value of speaking out, even when people will hate you for it. I've always loved Phil Donahue. He will be missed. I'm Ron Reader, and this has been Ron Reader Digs the Universe. Join me, Ron Reader, again next week for another episode of Ron Reader Digs the Universe.